In the spring of 2026, a major American company stood up in front of analysts and announced the best revenue quarter in its history. Same quarter, same company, it lost more money than ever before. Nobody panicked. The stock didn't crash. A few headlines even called it strong growth. That sentence should bother you. Revenue up, losses up, stock up. Three numbers that should be pulling against each other, all moving in the same direction, and almost nobody in the room asked why. Here's the uncomfortable part. The income statement that made this possible isn't broken. It's not a glitch in the system. It's working exactly as designed. The problem is that almost nobody reads it the way it's meant to be read. Most people glance at one number, the headline number, and walk away with a story the rest of the document was quietly contradicting. This is the document every public company in America is legally required to publish 4 times a year. It's the closest thing capitalism has to a confession, and most people treat it like a receipt. Think about how strange that actually is. There's a federally mandated document, audited, signed, filed with regulators, that exists specifically to tell you whether a business is making or losing money. It is, by law, supposed to be one of the most honest things a company ever publishes, and the most common way people interact with it is a single number flashed across a stock app for 4 seconds before they swipe to the next ticker. We're going to take it apart, line by line, the way a forensic accountant would, not the way a finance professor would. By the end, you'll understand why a company can look like it's winning and be quietly dying, and why the reverse is just as common. Right now, in mid-2026, this matters more than it has in years. American companies are spending historic amounts of money building out AI infrastructure, chips, data centers, compute. That spending shows up on the income statement in ways that can make a struggling business look explosive and a genuinely strong business look like it's stalling. Earnings season has turned into a kind of theater, and the income statement is the script everyone's reading from, but almost nobody's reading closely. So let's start at the top, because the order this document is built in is not an accident. Every line exists to answer one question before letting you move to the next. The first number is revenue. Total sales, money the company says it earned from doing the thing it does, selling phones, selling ad space, selling insurance, selling subscriptions. This is the number that gets screamed in headlines, record revenue. It's also the number that's easiest to make look better than it is, and we'll come back to that. Subtract the cost of actually producing what was sold, the materials, the direct labor, the factory time, and you get gross profit. This is the first moment of honesty in the statement. It answers a simple question. After paying for the thing itself, is there anything left over? A software company with no factories might keep 80 cents of every dollar at this stage. An airline might keep 25. Neither is good or bad on its own. It depends entirely on what kind of business you're looking at, which is the first trap most beginners fall into. They compare gross margins across industries like they're the same sport. They're not even the same stadium. Keep going. Subtract operating expenses, marketing, research, salaries for people who don't build the product but keep the company running, rent on offices, and you land on operating income. This is the number serious investors actually care about, far more than revenue. It tells you whether the core business, stripped of financial games, stripped of one-time noise, actually makes money doing what it claims to do. There's a subtler trick living inside that gross profit line, too, and it rarely gets discussed outside accounting departments. Inventory valuation and depreciation schedules. A company has legal flexibility in how it values goods still sitting in a warehouse and how quickly it writes down the cost of equipment over time. Stretch that depreciation out over more years and current expenses shrink, current profit grows, and nothing about the actual factory floor has changed. It's the financial equivalent of paying off a credit card by opening a new one. The bill doesn't disappear, it just moves to a quarter that hasn't happened yet. Below that, things get murky on purpose. interest paid on debt, interest earned on cash, gains or losses from selling an asset, currency effects from operating overseas, one-time settlements. These get bundled into a category vaguely labeled Other, and that vague label is doing a lot of quiet work. A company can have a terrible year running its actual business and still post a profit because it sold a building or won a lawsuit or its currency hedges happen to pay off. None of that has anything to do with whether the business itself is healthy, but it lands on the same page in the same font size as everything else. Then taxes get subtracted and you finally reach the bottom, net income, the number that gets divided by share count to produce earnings per share, the single most quoted, most headlined, most market-moving number in corporate America. And here's the part almost nobody says out loud. Net income is the least useful number on the entire page if you're trying to understand whether a company is actually doing well, because it's the number with the most places to hide things. Let that sit for a second. The number everyone obsesses over is the one furthest from the truth because it's traveled through the most adjustments, the most judgment calls, the most places where a finance team gets to decide how something should be labeled.
And even after net income is calculated, there's one more lever left to pull. Earnings per share depends on two numbers, not one: profit and the number of shares that profit gets divided across. A company can quietly buy back its own stock, shrinking the share count, and watch earnings per share climb, even if total profit didn't grow by a single dollar. The business made the same money. Wall Street just got handed a bigger slice because there are fewer plates at the table. It's a real, legal, common practice. It's also a number that can rise while the underlying business stands completely still. So how does the hiding actually happen? Not illegally, usually, legally. That's the part that should unsettle you more, not less. Take revenue recognition. This sounds boring. It is not boring. It's one of the most contested battlegrounds in accounting because companies have real flexibility in deciding when money counts. A software company signs a 5-year contract worth $50 million. Did it earn $50 million this quarter? Obviously not, but depending on how the contract is structured, accounting rules allow a meaningful chunk of that to be recognized now, today, this quarter, even though the cash hasn't arrived and the service hasn't been delivered yet. This isn't fraud, it's standard practice, but it means a company can show record revenue off contracts that are mostly promises, not money in hand. This is exactly the mechanism that took down Enron in 2001. Enron didn't just lie about numbers, it used legitimate-sounding accounting techniques, mark-to-market valuation on long-term energy contracts, to book profits today on deals that might not pay off for years, sometimes decades. The income statement looked spectacular. The cash never showed up the way the income statement implied it would. By the time the gap became impossible to hide, the company evaporated in weeks, not years. Then there's the other direction, expenses that should hit the income statement immediately but get pushed somewhere else. WorldCom, a year after Enron, got caught doing almost the opposite trick. Billions in ordinary operating costs, the kind that should reduce profit the moment they're spent, got reclassified as long-term capital investments instead. That single decision on paper turned a company that was losing money into one that appeared profitable. It wasn't a complicated fraud. It was one accounting category swapped for another. And it worked, for a while, because almost nobody outside the finance department was checking which bucket those costs landed in. You don't need a scandal to see a milder version of this happening constantly, right now in 2026. Stock-based compensation is the modern, fully legal cousin of this trick. Companies pay employees, especially in tech, partly in stock instead of cash. That stock has real value. It dilutes existing shareholders. It's a genuine cost of running the business. But many companies report an adjusted profit figure that conveniently excludes it, as if paying people in stock isn't really an expense at all. It's right there in the footnotes if you go looking. Most people don't go looking. They see the adjusted number in the headline and never ask what got adjusted out.
This is where the gap between hype and reality lives. Two companies can report the exact same revenue growth this quarter. One built that growth on actual customers paying actual cash for a product people want. The other built it on aggressive contract accounting, one-time asset sales, and a generous definition of adjusted earnings that excludes anything inconvenient. From the headline, they look identical. From the actual statement, read line by line, they're not even close.
WeWork is the case study people still bring up, and for good reason. Before its failed 2019 IPO attempt, the company introduced a metric it called Community-Adjusted EBITDA. It excluded not just stock compensation and interest, the usual suspects, but also marketing costs, general administrative expenses, and development costs for new locations. By the time you stripped out everything WeWork wanted stripped out, a company hemorrhaging billions of dollars a year looked, on a slide, almost profitable. The number wasn't fake in the sense of being fabricated. It was real arithmetic. It just measured a business that didn't exist, a version of WeWork with all its actual costs removed. There's a quieter version of this same idea that played out for years in the auto industry, and it's almost funny once you see it. For a long stretch, Tesla's reported profits leaned heavily on selling regulatory credits, government-mandated certificates other automakers were required to buy because they weren't producing enough electric vehicles themselves. In some of those early profitable quarters, the income from those credit sales was larger than the company's entire net income. Strip the credits out, and several profitable quarters quietly become losses. None of it was hidden. It was disclosed every time, in plain language. It just wasn't the headline. The headline said, "Profitable car company." The footnote said, "Profitable because competitors paid us not to compete." Both were true. Only one made it into the press coverage. Here's the part that should really sit with you. None of this required breaking the law. Almost all of it is disclosed, technically, somewhere in a footnote, in an appendix, in a sentence buried on page 40 of a filing nobody reads past the summary. The system isn't lying to you. It's betting you won't read closely enough to catch it telling you the truth in the most boring, least visible way possible. So what does reading it properly actually look like? Not complicated, just patient. Start by ignoring the headline number entirely for a moment. Look at revenue growth and ask where it came from. Existing customers buying more, or new contracts being signed and recognized early? Then look at gross margin and ask whether it's moving in a direction that matches the company's own story. A company claiming to get more efficient should show gross margins expanding over time, not shrinking. If a company says it's becoming a software business, but its margins still look like a manufacturing business, that's a contradiction worth chasing, not ignoring. Then go to operating income, not net income, and ask if the core business, stripped of one-time noise, is actually generating profit from doing the thing it claims to do. Then, and only then, look at everything between operating income and net income, the interest, the one-time gains, the tax adjustments, and ask a simple question. Is any of this repeatable? A one-time gain from selling a headquarters building is not a business model. If a meaningful chunk of profit came from something that can't happen again next quarter, the headline profit number is telling you almost nothing about next quarter. Finally, check stock-based compensation and any adjusted figures against the unadjusted ones. The size of that gap tells you how much storytelling is happening between the real number and the one being marketed to you. Put a number on it, because abstractions are easy to nod along to and forget by the next scene. Imagine a company reports $2 billion in revenue, up nicely from last year, and $300 million in net income, a healthy-looking profit margin on the surface. Now imagine that same quarter included a one-time gain of $200 million from selling off an old office building, and another $100 million in stock-based compensation that got excluded from the adjusted profit figure quoted in the press release. Strip both out, and that $300 million in profit isn't $300 million anymore. It's effectively zero, or close to it, from the actual repeatable business. The headline said profitable quarter. The arithmetic, once you account for what won't happen again next quarter, says broke even at best, and only because of a building sale. Nobody lied. The press release just stopped talking before the math finished. None of this takes an accounting degree. It takes about 15 minutes and the willingness to keep reading after the first number stops flattering the narrative you wanted to believe.
Now, zoom out, because this isn't really a story about spreadsheets. It's a story about who gets fooled and who doesn't. Institutional investors, the hedge funds, the pension fund analysts, the people running nine-figure portfolios, read past the headline as a matter of professional survival. It's their job. Retail investors, the people trading from an app on their phone between meetings, overwhelmingly do not. Study after study on market behavior shows retail trading volume spikes hardest around headline earnings beats and misses, the exact numbers most easily engineered through the techniques we just walked through. The most manipulatable number in the entire statement is the one moving the most money from the people least equipped to question it. That's not an accident of human nature. It's a known feature of the system. Earnings reports are written, formatted, and timed by investor relations teams whose job is to maximize the impact of good news and minimize the visibility of bad news, all without crossing into anything illegal. The press release leads with the flattering number. The footnote with the inconvenient one comes 40 pages later. Both are accurate. Only one gets read by 90% of the audience.
And it doesn't stay contained to individual traders losing money on a bad bet. Most American households have exposure to this through channels they never think about: a 401k, a pension fund, an index fund quietly bought through a workplace retirement plan. Those funds are managed by professionals who do read the footnotes, but the money inside them belongs to people who never will. When a headline number turns out to have been built on something temporary, a one-time gain, an aggressive revenue recognition call, a credit sale that won't repeat, the correction in the stock price doesn't ask permission from the people holding it through their retirement account. The gap between the headline and the footnote eventually closes. It just closes on a timeline of the market's choosing, not the investors'. In 2026, with AI infrastructure spending reshaping balance sheets across the entire tech sector, this gap is widening, not closing. Companies are capitalizing massive amounts of spending on chips and data centers, spreading the cost over years on the income statement instead of taking it all at once. That's standard, defensible accounting. It can also make a company's current profitability look far healthier than its actual cash position, because the cash already left the building. It's just the income statement hasn't admitted it yet. Whether that CapEx eventually turns into real, durable revenue, or whether it's the most expensive game of chicken in corporate history, is a question the income statement alone cannot answer. It can only tell you how the bet is being recorded, not whether it's going to pay off. This is also why comparing income statements across companies, the way most retail investors do, often produces nonsense conclusions. Two companies in the same sector can be running entirely different accounting strategies, one depreciating its infrastructure aggressively over 3 years, the other stretching the same kind of spending across 10. Same money spent, same equipment bought, wildly different profit figures on paper this quarter. The instinct is to assume the higher margin company is simply better run. Sometimes it is. Just as often, it's simply better at choosing which quarter to absorb the pain in. That's the real risk underneath all of this. Not that any single company is necessarily lying, most aren't. It's that an entire generation of investors has been trained to react to a number that was never designed to be read in isolation by people whose entire incentive is to make sure you stop reading right after it. So the next time a company tells you it just had its best quarter ever, don't ask whether the number is real. It probably is. Ask a better question instead. Real compared to what story they needed it to tell.